Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, greetings, friends, and welcome to this December 31st, New Year's Eve edition of Nightcast as the world celebrates with all kind of fireworks tonight around the globe. You know, this Roman calendar thing, the Roman Empire started it. Adopted by the whole world. Later in the program tonight, friends, we'll play a clip that'll take you from country to country, many different big cities as you see their fireworks going off, with a lot of the rest of the world being so far ahead of us where we are here in the United States. They've already had their New Year's Eve celebrations. But, you know, it's like, is it the real New Year that begins tomorrow, that begins at midnight tonight? You know, it's kind of, to me, friends, it's like a $20, counterfeit $20 bill, you know, printed in the basement of some big-time criminal or even, you know, some small-time criminal. The New Year, the Roman calendar, the calendar created by the Roman Empire, Julian, and then had to be changed to make it work out with straightening out taking a 10-day whack out of it to sync the calendar back up by Gregorian, Pope Gregory. So now we call it the Gregorian calendar, but it's the calendar of the Roman Empire, an empire that is going to have one last big revival. But then it's going to, following that, Jesus Christ is going to return and smash on the toes, the 10 toes, the countries that come together, 5 from the east, 5 from the west, and give their power to that end-time emperor. Pretty soon to happen. Going to be smashed and replaced by the government, the kingdom of God. We'll then truly have a one-world government, a government reigned and ruled over by the Creator God and His Son, Jesus Christ, here in person to reign and rule over it, and some that He's pre-selected to help reign and rule with Him will be on that throne as well. Then we'll be on a different calendar. We'll be on the calendar. You can see the date in my lower third of that sacred calendar, also known as the Hebrew calendar. And it goes, you know, where are we now? Let me put something up front real quick where I can take a look at a screen where I can see that. Well, actually, now I can't see it at all. Anyway, I think you can see it's the 28th day of the 10th month. Right down there, you can see it. Somewhere over here. Yeah, over this way. Yeah. On the bottom. I always put that there. That's going to be the calendar of the future. That is the eternal calendar of the future. This other one on the other side over here, that's going out when Jesus Christ returns. But a lot of us grew up, you know, knowing that, being taught that December 31st was New Year's Eve and January 1 was the brand new year, and we got involved, some of us, in staying up to midnight and doing those big celebrations too. But hey, we've got news tonight, including tonight I have news for you that will show you the top stories of, you know, we have to play along with this world. They've got the market on the calendar. I mean, you do business with people, you work for an employer, they tell you to be here on January 2nd at 9 o'clock in the morning. You better understand the Roman calendar. We grew up having, you know, to live and work with people on the basis of that calendar. And so we'll show you, based on the Roman year, we'll show you the top stories of the year tonight. The BBC's put together a pretty interesting little tidbit on that. Now, going, though, to the first story for tonight. Just a moment while I think of what I decided. Oh, yes. All right. Friends, of all the news that's in the news today, this story regarding the Eurozone, to me, is really the top story to end out the year, the Roman year with. Because what we're going to be looking at this next year is a great possibility that the Eurozone will pull together into a United States of Europe. There's a great possibility for that. I'm not saying it's going to happen. We could swing on over to 2015 or even 2016, but it could happen a lot faster than some people. It could happen overnight, faster than a lot of people may think. But in the story we're going to open with, a lot has changed in the Eurozone over the past 2 years. In 2013, Ireland emerged from the bailout, and Portugal hopes to follow suit in 2014. Ireland bailed out last year. Portugal hopes to follow suit in the coming year, in 2014. The sense of the crisis in the currency zone is receding as the question of whether the euro would even survive seems to have gone away for now. Yet the problems are far from over, as unemployment is still rampant in many countries. So can we say that the Eurozone crisis is over? Joe Lyman reports.
Will leave the euro. I think there is no alternative.
This time 2 years ago, some of the world's most influential people were convinced that the game was up for the Eurozone.
I'd be amazed if we were all sitting here next year and the euro had not undergone some sort of change. I think it highly likely that there will be a realignment, in the sense that I think that
some countries will fall out.
I think possibly, yes, and we all know who the likely candidates are.
The European single currency had already seen multiple bailouts, soaring government borrowing costs, and major unrest on the streets. There was a definite sense that the decade-old currency would break apart. And then it stopped, with this small but significant sentence by the European Central Bank boss, Mario Draghi.
The ECB is ready to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro. And believe me, it will be enough.
Europe-wide austerity didn't stop, though, with these magic words, nor did the street protests. But the fear that the euro would imminently break up did. And that is translated into better macroeconomic stats for many troubled Eurozone countries, none more troubled than Greece. There, bond yields, or the cost of borrowing for the Greek government, have plummeted from 36% to 8%. Unemployment is still no longer rising, but it's still at a jaw-dropping 27%. Youth joblessness is over 55%. GDP has fallen non-stop for 3 years, but the OECD and the EU expect it to start growing next year as the country becomes more competitive. Because most of the rest of the world is recovering quickly, Italian exports are set to drag the country out of the economic mud. GDP will fall by 1.8% this year, according to the European Commission, but will start rising again next year, but by a very modest 0.6%. Domestically, things are very weak still in Italy. House prices have fallen by almost a fifth since 2007, and its total debt stands at a whopping 133% this year, and is expected to rise to 134% next year. Now, Spain may not consider itself a full bailout country, but its banks have benefited greatly from the ESM bailout fund, and it's bearing fruit. GDP fell 1.6% last year and is set to fall further 1.3% this year, but it should recover by 0.5% in 2014. Unemployment, though, is still a shocking 26%, with youth unemployment at 56%. And that's adding to Spain's debt mountain, which has risen from 86% last year, 95% this year, and is expected to reach a whopping 100% in 2014. But the engine of Europe, the Eurozone's paymaster Germany, is not growing at anything like the speed needed to drag the entire currency bloc out of the mud. German growth is expected to be only 0.5% this year and a modest 1.7% next year. Amazingly, though, Germany is expected to have a balanced budget this year and a surplus next year of plus 0.1%. But does all this mean that the Eurozone crisis is now finally over?
Well, the Eurozone crisis is much less severe than it was, and we should be close to the end. We think that by the middle of next year, when Portugal exits the bailout conditions, the Eurozone crisis can be put behind us for good.
They're still haggling over how best to prevent another Eurozone flare-up. Banking union and potentially even fiscal union are nearing agreement. But national interests will always come first, so we can never say for certain that the crisis is over. Joe Lynham, BBC News.
Friends, New Year celebrations have been taking place across the world, welcoming in the start of 2014. Australia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Shanghai have celebrated with elaborate fireworks displays. Nick Beek reports.
Tonight, at the world's tallest building, a stunning world record attempt. Dubai hopes its 500,000 fireworks will go down as the biggest ever New Year's display. But as ever, Sydney's efforts were spectacular. More than 1 million crammed into the harbour. The Great Wall of China became a canvas of colour. Shanghai's night sky dazzled, as did Hong Kong's. And in the Russian capital, the Kremlin formed the backdrop for the celebrations there. Here, with less than 2 hours to go, excitement in Edinburgh is building. And in central London, 250,000 are descending on Big Ben, whose chimes will herald the start of 2014. Nick Beek, BBC News.
Friends, last night we reported to you about the derailment of the freight train, the mile-long crude oil train in North Dakota. And tonight we have some very interesting video that's been made available by an amateur. And it's amateur video showing the crude oil train having burst into flames as it derailed after a collision with another train. A plume of black smoke could be seen many miles away, and explosions were heard. No injuries were reported, but officials ordered the evacuation of about 300 people from the nearby town of Castleton. Here's the amateur footage that caught some of the explosions.
So we're coming in on 94, we're heading east, maybe doing 75, 80 miles an hour. And as we come underneath these clouds, it's almost like, it was like nighttime, you know, it was just dark. The entire sky is just blacked out, you know, you can't see anything. And so we come in here, we're kind of digging around on these side streets, trying to get a close view. And yeah, it was a pretty surreal feeling overall, yeah.
It was the third explosion that rattled the house, and the doors and the windows were all shaking, and Scott and I came out the garage door, and the flames were so high, and it was like it was right happening behind us.
I've never seen anything like this ever happen before here, so I mean, okay, I've lived here 70 years so it's really crazy.
Yes, my friends, last night I mentioned to you about a ski accident that left a fellow in critical condition. Neurosurgeons in France who are treating Michael Schumacher say he is showing a slight improvement following a second operation last night to relieve pressure on his brain. The situation is now said to be better controlled, although the former Formula One world champion is not yet out of danger. Schumacher suffered a serious head injury after a skiing accident on Sunday. Richard Conway reports.
A quiet Sunday morning skiing with his son. But as these pictures appear to show, Michael Schumacher had to be flown by helicopter for emergency treatment after falling and sustaining a violent blow to the head, an injury that has left him fighting for his life. Doctors operated for a second time on Schumacher overnight. It has, they say, relieved pressure on his brain, but they are for now still taking it hour by hour.
La situation est mieux contrôlée qu'hier. The situation is better controlled than yesterday. We can't say he is out of danger, but we've now gained a bit more time in the development of his injuries, and the hours to come are still critical.
Schumacher is no stranger to risk. A love of speed, danger and living life on the edge led him to be described by Juan Manuel Fangio, his closest rival in motor racing folklore, as the greatest of adventurers. This area of France is a skier's paradise, but accidents on the nearby slopes leave the neurology ward at the Grenoble University Hospital a busy place at this time of year. Mary Griss's husband Fernando suffered a brain hemorrhage after a skiing accident last week. He's on course to make a full recovery and return to Britain, with his wife grateful for the care he received.
From the minute that he had his accident last Friday, the care has been just superb. From the transfer to the first hospital and then on to here has been just so efficient and so caring.
Friends, there's news from Israel tonight as we close out the Roman year 2013. Israeli authorities have freed a group of 26 Palestinian prisoners as part of a U.S. brokered agreement to resume direct peace talks. It's the third of 4 such planned actions, with the last group expected to be released in April. Wendy Urquhart reports.
Hundreds waited for the men to arrive, and when they did, officials, friends and relatives gave them a hero's welcome, waving flags and setting off fireworks to celebrate their release. Later the men were driven to Ramallah, where the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas was waiting to greet them. After welcoming each one, Mr. Abbas told the crowd this was a day to remember.
This day is a happy day for all of us, for our people, for our families, and for our hero prisoners who were freed today to live free.
Not everyone is happy about the inmates returning to the West Bank and Gaza. The families of Israeli victims of political violence deeply resent the release of the Palestinians and have staged a number of protests to make their feelings known. But the Israeli Prime Minister says the release is a necessary step.
Leadership is being judged by its ability to execute tough decisions, decisions which are taken no matter how tough they are. We were not elected to represent the State of Israel to take on decisions which are easy to make. The State of Israel has a strategic interest in negotiations which aim to reach an agreement which will end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
The Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem have always been a sticking point between the Israelis and Palestinians. They're regarded as illegal under international law, although Israel disputes that. In the past, the release of Palestinian prisoners has been swiftly followed by the approval of new settlement homes. The prisoners were freed under the terms of an American brokered deal, which cleared the way for the current peace talks. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is due to arrive in Jerusalem on New Year's Day to meet the Israeli Prime Minister and the Palestinian President. Wendy Urquhart, BBC News.
You know, friends, interesting thing in this story is that the United States, Ephraim and the UK, Manasseh and Ephraim, well, mainly Manasseh's brokering this deal, the United States, and brother Judah. Amazing that the leaders of the nation of Judah now, Israel, can comment like, "Oh, we're doing this because we're going to try to work out a permanent peace agreement with these Palestinians." You know, they think they can do it as if it were overnight. And like in the next story that's coming up from Northern Ireland, where they're trying to broker out a peace agreement there. They broke up without agreement, thinking that a deal can be struck that's permanent, a peace that's going to be a real lasting peace, and the Palestinians will lob no more rockets or try to wipe Israel off the map. That problem, that disagreement, that conflict, that strife goes back thousands of years to the time of Abraham and his son sons, plural, his son Ishmael via a handmaid, Hagar, and his legitimate son Isaac via his wife Sarah. The contention and the wild man that is in Ishmael, as God prophesied it, is not going to be taken out of Ishmael until Jesus Christ himself returns to this earth. Duh. But anyway, we show you the news of what's happening. In the next story from Northern Ireland, it breaks up without agreement. Former U.S. diplomat Richard Haas, who chaired the talks, said significant progress had been made. Chris Page reports.
Despite hard work, long days, and negotiating through the night, Richard Haas couldn't get a deal. The talks broke up before 6 this morning, but the American chairman said the process had not been a failure.
I believe we have made significant progress, but this is also a work in progress. And yes, it would have been nice to have come out here tonight and say we've got all 5 parties completely signed on to the text. We are not there.
Overnight, Dr. Haas put final proposals to the 5 parties in the Stormont executive. Nationalist politicians were generally in favour.
This compromise is far short of what we were proposing, but we think that the vast majority of people want to see it embraced, and that's why we have taken up a positive attitude towards it.
But unionists had concerns.
We entered this process to come to the right deal, to get the right deal for the people of Northern Ireland, but not any deal.
So why was there no agreement? A number of areas remained unresolved. They included a code of conduct for people involved in parades. On the issue of the past, it's believed there was disagreement over the language in proposals about how to deal with unsolved killings. The discussions focused on parading the past and flags, the matters left over after years of peace process negotiations. For now, getting a deal has proved too difficult.
And friends, I promised you earlier in the program that we would take a look at events from 2013, from the fall of governments and terrorist attacks to revelations of spying and continued bloodshed in Syria. 2013 saw many moments in the world of international affairs and global politics. Tom Bagley looks back at some of the biggest news stories to make the headlines in 2013.
The start of the year saw Western military action in Mali as French troops led a successful mission to defeat Islamist rebels in the north of the country. Over the border in Algeria, a siege of a gas facility by Islamic militants lasted several days and saw the death of dozens of hostages and 29 kidnappers.
Barack Hussein Obama do solemnly swear.
In Washington, huge crowds gathered to see President Obama inaugurated for a second term in office, following his election victory of 2012. Pope Benedict stunned the world in February as he announced he was standing down due to his advancing age. From the Korean peninsula came the news that North Korea had carried out a new underground nuclear test and seemed on its way to developing a new arsenal. March saw Venezuela say goodbye to its leader of 14 years as Hugo Chavez finally succumbed to his long battle with cancer. White smoke from the Vatican signalled news of a new pope as Argentina's Cardinal Bergoglio became Pope Francis, the first pontiff to hail from Latin America. A new era was also beginning in China as Xi Jinping assumed the presidency. April was dominated by increasing tension over North Korea's nuclear capability and a series of bellicose threats issued against neighbouring South Korea and the USA. Also making headlines was the death of Margaret Thatcher, the former British Prime Minister who passed away at the age of 87. In the USA, there were traumatic scenes when 2 bombs detonated at the Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and injuring more than 170. A dramatic hunt for those responsible ended with 1 suspect shot dead and the second detained. May brought momentous elections in Pakistan that saw the first successful transition from one democratically elected parliament to another in the country's 66-year history. In Turkey began a series of mass protests. Thousands took to the streets calling for the resignation of the country's Prime Minister Erdogan over what they saw as his authoritarian rule. There were similar scenes in Brazil in June, when what began as a simple dispute over bus fare rises led to violent clashes and police crackdown across much of the country. One of the biggest stories of the year broke in June, when former US intelligence analyst Edward Snowden was revealed as the source of a number of leaks of highly sensitive US intelligence. And a new chapter was beginning for Iran and its relationship with the rest of the world, following the election of the moderate Hassan Rouhani as the country's new president. Months of protests came to a head in Egypt in July, with the military deposing President Morsi and suspending the constitution in a move they described as an attempt at national reconciliation, but seen by many as a coup. August saw the news of Russia granting asylum to fugitive US intelligence leaker Edward Snowden, provoking fury from the US government. In Egypt, a military crackdown on protesting supporters of the deposed President Morsi led to the loss of many lives and a declaration of a state of emergency. And as the civil war in Syria continued to rage, graphic images emerged seemingly showing evidence of the use of chemical weapons in rebel areas by government forces. The images caused revulsion across the world, but the Assad government denied responsibility for any such attack. Military intervention in Syria by Western powers seemed inevitable in September, before an offer from President Assad to hand over and destroy chemical weapons saw the US and key allies step back from the brink of military action. In Kenya, the siege of a shopping mall in the capital Nairobi by terrorists led to horrific scenes and the death of at least 72 people, with Islamist group Al-Shabaab claiming responsibility. Whilst Iran's new president was seemingly building bridges and making history when he and President Obama held a 15-minute phone conversation, the first between the two countries' leaders in more than 30 years. The US dominated headlines in October, from its government shutdown to further revelations on the country's mass surveillance programs, including the phone tapping of German Chancellor Angela Merkel, straining relations with many of its political allies. November saw a momentous breakthrough in negotiations over Iran's nuclear capability, when a 6-month deal was struck that would see the halting of uranium production beyond 5%, and UN inspectors granted daily access to enrichment facilities. In exchange, crippling sanctions against the country would be eased. December saw an escalation of mass anti-government protests in Ukraine, largely triggered by a decision not to sign a far-reaching partnership deal with the EU. There were similar scenes in Thailand, where thousands took to the street and occupied government buildings. After weeks of protests, embattled Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra dissolved Parliament and called an election for early next year. The end of the year saw further French military intervention in Africa, this time in the Central African Republic, with troops sent alongside African peacekeepers to restore order after a rebel takeover in March. And the world said goodbye and paid tribute to an iconic figure when South Africa's anti-apartheid leader Nelson Mandela passed away at the age of 95.
Friends, bitterly cold weather has gripped several states in the U.S. and temperatures are expected to plummet further. Homeless shelters in Maine are struggling to cope with the extra demand for places for people to stay overnight in this harsh cold, while drivers in North Dakota have been advised to stay off the roads unless their journey is absolutely necessary. Wendy Urquhart reports.
In Augusta, Maine, the snow is already falling, but utility workers are determined to trim back these trees before it gets any worse. Another storm is on its way, and forecasters say it'll dump 25 centimetres of snow in some areas, so getting rid of these icy branches safely is a must. For those who are homeless, this winter weather is grim. In Wisconsin, around 170 men queued up at a drop-in shelter which offers hot food and a place to stay. It's already full, but Steve Schooler, who runs it, says sometimes you just have to break the rules.
Frankly, on nights like tonight, we just make room. We just make room. We don't turn anyone away because there's no room at the end. We don't do that.
In Minnesota, temperatures hovered at 21 below zero on Monday morning. By midday, they'd climbed up to -7, but only the brave ventured out. The authorities here even closed the local ice rink because they said it was too cold to skate. It's about to get worse too. Overnight, the mercury is expected to plummet to around 45 degrees below zero. Visibility was nil in North Dakota after 80-kilometre winds whipped up the snow. A no travel advisory has been issued and drivers were told, stay at home. Wendy Urquhart, BBC News.
Friends, thank you for joining me tonight. That's it for our reports for 2013 on the Roman calendar. God willing, and the creek don't rise, and none of this terrible snow interrupts our power like it has in some places in the United States. Some people still without power since a week and a half ago. God willing, we'll be back tomorrow night, Wednesday night, in the pagan Roman year of 2014 for our next report of the current day's world news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, friends, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.